Well, hello and welcome back to Roundtable Mindset. This is Jamie.
And I'm Mahlon.
And we're back for a whole new episode in our season 3 reboot season. Are we rebooting the season?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe. I guess we could call it reboot. I don't know what you'd call it. Directional change? I don't know. It sounds good. Rebooting. I love rebooting. We'll go with rebooting.
I was going to say all the reboot movies are kind of my favorite, if we're being honest. My dad loved all the old Star Trek movies. I loved all the new Star Trek movies. So that's just reboots are my thing.
Well, then that's what we're doing. We're rebooting. So
good. How are things over in the land of still raising children over there, my friend?
It is fast and furious. So, I used to joke with my parents a long time ago that said, when we had kids, I can't wait for, kids to get older and get grown ups. That way we can stop being parents. And they just laughed at me and they're like, and then finally, after they laughed at me a couple times, I was always like, why are you guys laughing? And they're like, don't you understand that parenting just changes and never goes away? And when they become adults, you just have a whole new different set of criteria that you have to worry about. And I was like, well, I don't think that's the case. That is the case. So as my adult daughter is embarking out on her own, she's living her life. She's recently switched schools, and so she's going to find an apartment, and so she is officially going to be living on her own, but with a roommate, so just out from mom and dad. So that's kind of interesting. And then the other two, just fast and furious going through high school. There's tons of, football stuff going on and kids changing every day. And my youngest is just about to enter high school. He has one more year. So it's just a lot. It's like, I think for the first time I can understand herding cats is that there's everybody's going in their own direction.
Yep.
And the one thing that I never thought about that phrase is the cats don't want to be herded, right?
No.
Like I always thought, oh, yes, somebody needs to gather them and put them in one place, but the cats are like, nah, I'm good. We don't need you, so go away.
Yeah, I get that. I see, and here I am in a space where my coworkers are starting to get annoyed with me because I keep asking repeatedly when school starts, because that is so off my radar. It's not even funny. Like, oh yeah, school's starting in like a week or something. You know what I mean? So,
my son, my youngest, this is the last year we have to go through school supplies because they don't provide a list. Where I live, they don't provide a list once they hit high school, and so we have one more. And here's the nerd I am. I love school so much that going to get school supplies was like my first Christmas, right? Like I couldn't wait to get the list, go get all my stuff. And I was the first one to volunteer with my kids to be like, yes, let's go. It's July, right? And I'm like, they're putting Christmas stuff or they're getting school stuff out. Let's go and get it. And my kids are like, you're out of your mind. Like literally out of your mind. We're waiting to the last day. Okay. Well, when you get Dora the Explorer backpacks because everything else is gone, don't come crying to me.
When your pencils are full of Bluey, that's on you, bud.
Exactly. No, but I love it. I love the time of year. I just, summer is great, but I'm one who likes to have some routine and organization. And I love it when summer first hits and all the kids kind of get, I'll say, off their chain and they can just do whatever they want and they start going with the flow and you can start seeing them kind of relax and you're like, yeah, I remember that as a kid. But man, I cannot wait for the school routine to start back up and get some order back into their lives because they've been running amok too long.
Yeah. Well, seeing as much as I don't care about school starting because it doesn't really affect my day to day, I will tell you that the other day, just a couple days ago, I needed a sweatshirt in the evening. And that's like lit my soul on fire. Here comes fall. We probably have another couple weeks or
8 weeks.
Well, several weeks of at least 95-degree weather possibilities, right? But when it was 58 degrees or something outside and I got to put on a sweatshirt, I felt alive again. It was fantastic.
Jamie was home. Welcome home, Jamie.
It was awesome.
Pumpkin spice everything. It's March. You're like, I don't care. Pumpkin spice everything.
Literally today I was like, I think I might decorate for fall this year. Mums, anyone? Let's get some mums.
First, let's Let's go to the 4th of July fireworks, and then we'll pick up some mums on the way home.
Yes. I mean, they've got Christmas out in the grocery stores already, right? Why can't I put
You can live your life. That's right.
where are my mums?
Some might say that would be a form of trauma. Mm.
Sorry, that was a great segue. You know what it does traumatize me is the humidity and heat in your state. So let's talk about our topic today, right? I'm just kidding.
That's called PTSD. That's its own set of,
Dude, you're not even okay. Now we sound like we're on TikTok. I was so triggered or something, but that's not. Yes. In all seriousness, though, we do have a really qualified guest to come on and visit with us today. My friend Dave is a therapist in the town that I work in. We've worked together for quite a few years, Dave. I mean, we've had families we've worked with together and in some different other capacities. But I was hoping to bring you on today to talk about trauma and how that and part of the reason I thought this would be a valuable topic is because it is so all over the TikToks, all over the social media. You know, you've always got a TW, trigger warnings and things like that. And I'm not going to lie, my daughter did come home and say she was super triggered because they didn't have something at the store she was hoping to purchase. So it is kind of thrown around in a flippant way. And I thought it would be good to come back and talk about what trauma really is. So we'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Dave. And
hey, thanks for having me.
Dig right in, right?
This is so complex. Thank you for the opportunity. What I say here, I hope makes sense. But, I give you several years of clinical experience working as an outpatient therapist, primarily with adolescents, but I work with newborn to end of life. As well as I bring a lot of life experience, as Jamie alluded to earlier, otherwise known as I'm older.
You're
I
experienced.
didn't say you were 100 or anything.
Thanks.
We're older too, right?
Well, you are. I'm younger than Jamie.
15 days, whatever.
But they're an important 15 days. So Dave, I know, you and Jamie have some history and we're just kind of meeting and talking for the first time. And I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. As you could probably tell, even from our intro, Jamie has more, I'd say, a serious tone to this. And I don't want to make light of trauma. So I want to start off by saying some of the things that I have to say and my opinions. I recognize myself. It's because I do not work in a space that has to deal with other people and traumas. And, I've dealt with my own trauma and I have my own lens of life that I look through. So in no way, shape, or form do I want to diminish or try to make light of people who have or suffer from trauma. I just want to get that out there. With that being said, though, Jamie and I have completely different views on trauma. And again, I'm not going to qualify hers and she's not going to qualify mine. But what I'm hoping is that we can kind of bring those two differing perspectives to the conversation, because I think somewhere in between there lies the truth, just like in everything, right? There's my opinion and there's her opinion, and there's the real opinion or the truth or somewhere in between. And so I'm really hoping that you can kind of be, even in this one conversation, in this one moment, because I know you can't be, you don't speak for all, therapists or psychologists or anybody in the world. You speak for yourself. But in this conversation, I'm really hoping that we can kind of maybe get to that center spot and really look at it from both angles to say maybe there's aspects where they're both true and there's aspects where they're both false, but that's not important. What's important is when do they overlap and how do we make sense of it?
Oh, man. What a nice segue you guys have. I sometimes think of trauma comes from perspective. Certainly. I mean, we can define trauma from the element of an actual trauma being, doing a Google search. One will say it's a deeply distressing, disturbing event that overwhelms a person's capacity to cope, cause significant negative effects on their mental, emotional, and physical well-being. Know that it's different for everybody. What oftentimes I run into is layers of trauma, people who have a lens to where they will not have always a very good perspective on what is traumatic because I don't know. I think in a weird way, this is maybe hard to say for some, but as a byproduct of the technology that we have been given through life and where we are in our culture right now, we're immediate gratification. So when we interact with others, when we interact in a world where there's not immediate gratification or the answer doesn't quickly come up, I had this happen before. Somebody says that Walmart is out of marshmallows. They Googled it and they didn't see any in the store anywhere when they Googled marshmallows at Walmart. It was traumatic for them. And my response is, what did the staff say when you went and asked them? And they look at me like I'm from another planet. I was like, those are people you can ask and talk to them. And I have to coach them and role model this to get them to a point to where they are interacting with their world to find that it's maybe not so much a traumatic experience as much as it is disappointment, a lack of basic knowledge. Sometimes we call it a skills deficit versus a performance deficit. They never got the skill. And honest to goodness, some people might not like this, but I've seen that kind of increase exponentially as a byproduct of this silly thing that we went through a few years ago called the pandemic.
Right.
Well, and we're running into people, sorry, but we're running into folks that were in isolation who are now age of majority adults who missed out on a key developmental stage of socialization. And so I get it, but that's their perspective.
Well, and I was going to ask, and even just in you talking about that, it kind of shifted the lens a bit for me to say, okay, so maybe it's not about the event, because I think that's often where we go when we talk about trauma is the thing, the event, the big thing that happened. And maybe it is more in that second half of that definition of skills to cope and process. Because I've never looked at it that way before until literally 3 minutes ago. So
Yeah, but okay, so somebody who's not as familiar with this, I have a couple reactions to that, Dave, and some of them, I'm just going to give you my reactions, and they may seem a little bit insensitive. And again, I'm not trying to be, but I don't want to over sanitize this because I want this to be the raw conversation. Because I can't believe that I'm the only one that would think like this, right? But when I hear your example of the store being out of marshmallows, and again, I don't know what this person's life was like. I don't know what event took place, and I think to just add to that description, one thing that, in the conversations that I've been having with Jamie, a light bulb moment for me is that it's also trauma is subjective to each person, and it is about perspective. And so when I hear those things, I'm trying to apply them. I'm like, okay, I can get behind that to a certain extent. Where I fall short, where I can't get my mind wrapped around, is it's about marshmallows not being in the store. How is that a traumatic event? Because I want to qualify the event. Granted, they could have their own perspective of how they're going to work through it, but there should be something that would cause the trauma or trigger the trauma. And when you have something like that as an example, it makes me go, but that's not really trauma. So there has to be something else. What could be traumatic about not having marshmallows? I can't put my brain around that.
I feel like you were the parent in the room when I had this this person was age of majority, just so 18, 20-year-old range. And the parent was saying almost the same exact thing as what you were saying. And I said, however, you are viewing what they are experiencing through their lens, through your lens, not theirs. That is their experience to have, not yours. So it's unfortunate that you don't see it through your rose-colored glasses because they're looking through purple right now and they see everything through what their lens is. So being able to meet them, be able to agree to disagree, and then validate them and figure out what they need to help. And we'll talk on coping here in a little bit. But I do think when you peel this back a little bit from where this trauma experience comes from, you know, the struggle to cope, where does that come from? I think a lot of the research out there would indicate it comes from part of our personality development. When's our personality developed? The core of our personality is developed before we're 8 years old. So you think back to your childhood experiences and all the craziness of childhood toddlers and the terrible twos, tumultuous threes, and goodness knows what goes on around then. But that's where the framework is established, and then as we grow, we prune, we modify, we gain in wisdom and experience to where hopefully we are able to adapt and interact in our world in a better way. It doesn't always work that way for people, especially if they're been through significant events to where their brain, this is the cool thing about our brain too, is when we go through something in our life, our brain records a lot more than what we might be aware of. Some people think, well, I remember, when this significant event happened, but they might not remember the time of day, time of year, smells, temperature, humidity. We're talking about humidity before we went on about, all these kinds of things that your brain is astutely aware of, because what's our brain's purpose? Our brain's purpose, some people kind of never thought of it as like your heart beats keep you alive. Well, your brain's job is to keep you alive and to continue the species. That's why we tend to be attracted and feel the best when we are around others. We are still, in my humble opinion, slaves to our basic primal genetics. We are hunters and gatherers, tribal people. When we're clicking on all cylinders, we're eating right, we're sleeping right, we're together with others, we're contributing to the greater good, we're contributing. There are certain elements that if we can stay true to those core things, we're usually pretty good. But then life gets in the way. Natural disasters, floods, traumas, stuff, loss.
Well, and I do think there's a general perception that a traumatic event is like big, right? Like a big flood or, a tragic accident or something like that. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what other things could be? Because I'm thinking of like maybe they're not big events, but they're smaller events that last over time, that are continually happening. And things like that could cause some of that shift in thinking or the shift in reacting.
Mm-hmm. Good question. What I sometimes will see is when our brain is recording what we go through. So let's say 2-year-old goes 3-year-old, and as they're growing, they start interacting in their world. All of a sudden, they run into this thing called bullies. Especially when you're talking third, fourth grade, is a lot of times when that seems to take traction, when kids get nasty towards each other. Well, if they have had significant amount of damage done to their person, if they've been beat up, if they've been put in a locker, some of those kinds of traumatic experiences, it could be a thing that our brain records to where when they hear a locker, we might not even be cognizant that it is happening. But a locker latch, if you just been shoved into a locker not too long ago as a bully was bullying you, and all of a sudden the latch on the locker flips you out a little bit and scares you. And they're like, "What's wrong with me? I can't be in the hallway when we're switching periods anymore."
Mm-hmm.
So it's your brain's job doing what it does, and so many people don't recognize that, and then they immediately think that something's wrong with them, that this is silly. They start placing self-judgment on themselves, and then the next thing that I oftentimes run into in practice is then they start isolating. They either internalize it, isolate from everybody, or they externalize it and they become a behavior problem to where they're remodeling classrooms without permission.
Yeah.
So what happens then? I mean, you picked up another, just so happened, you picked up another example that I can relate to. I had a childhood bully when I was a kid. Third and fourth grade was a nightmare for me. In fact, I changed schools for 2 years because this bully was just nonstop. And then, so for fifth and sixth grade, I was in a different school it was a private Christian school that was removed from public education. And then in my seventh grade, I went back into the public school system and I had to reconfront my bully. And so when I hear that example, even again trying to take my own lived experience and apply it, I'm thinking, okay, well then what's wrong with me? Because I suffered, and I mean, I changed schools. It was there was a lot of tears, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of self-destruction going on because I was being bullied. And so I would say that I changed schools. That obviously went away. I didn't have to interact with that person. And then when I went back, do I think I was traumatized? No. Do I think that I handled it the best way when I was back in seventh grade? No, but I was also what, like a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, somewhere around that time frame. So I didn't have the mental capacities like I do today. However, what's wrong with me then that I don't consider that to be a trauma? And I actually found a way when I was back put into that situation where I was able to, I'll say, break the cycle. And I was
Hmm.
able at one point in time to confront and also maybe bully the bully. And I did have, I mean, I don't want to say that I'm victorious because it also triggered a 2, 3 year span where I was not in healthy relationships because of that. And I'm aware. But yet at the same time, I almost empowered myself. And so I'm hearing you and I'm thinking, okay, but then what's wrong with someone like me who went through all of this, doesn't look at it as a trauma, and then was able to dig himself out, maybe not the most effective way, if that makes sense, Dave. I'm
Yep.
trying to
Uh,
rationalize the two.
I'll try to theorize around this as best I can because what you describe is very real. It happens a lot in clinical practice, and a lot of times people are wondering why or how. And I was like, well, you think about this. Every life experience gains you wisdom. And when you experience third or fourth grade, this cool thing happens in biology of the human body to where we go through puberty. So you might have been 4 foot nothing, 80 pounds. You come back in seventh grade and you're 5 foot 10, 150 or something, whatever, your physical stature grows. And then you also have in there, you start getting this stuff called testosterone going through your body or estrogen. And your body goes through a whole metamorphosis. There's as much brain activity in an adolescence as a newborn. There is so much stuff going on there. And that's sometimes why I say adolescents, they tend to do things and they don't think things through very good. Uh, Nice way of making poor choices, cause and effect. I, I have humor with me and sometimes to a fault to be like, at what point did that sound like a good idea? It wasn't. I just lost my, I was like,
I can't relate to that at all. You know, I do think what's interesting, and because this is part of the conversation that Malin and I have had about this topic for quite some time, is that I remember a space and time where I was learning about trauma as part of my work, and it was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even think of it that way, or I didn't, it was like the education was able to give me words to put to the experiences that I had that I didn't necessarily recognize as causing um maybe some patterns of behavior that I didn't that weren't healthy, right? Um
mm,
and I think for me I dismissed it as other people have it so much worse, right? Like I that really wasn't that big of a deal. It's fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine because, I didn't lose my house in a tragic fire or something. You know what I'm saying? So, and I don't get that sense from Malin when we've talked about this that it's like, No, I experienced hard things, but it's not it's way better than other
It's
people
no
have.
biggie.
Yeah. What I hear from him more is, I mean, yeah, bad stuff happens and I got over it. You know what I mean? There's a
Yep, yep.
there's a big difference in that.
Yeah. And what I see oftentimes with that is resiliency, and that sometimes is part of that personality development, that there was some stressor, some situation, even if it's as a toddler, getting over and getting your favorite toy away from a sibling or something like that. You were able to achieve that and you got it back, and things are good. And so you're like, aha, I can do this. Your brain wires it in, and it doesn't get there's a saying that you don't lose it, you lose it, especially when you're going through developmental stages in life, or when you go through life as a human. We go through that.
Hmm.
I sometimes, and so those kinds of neural pathways are established that develops the resiliency factor, which does have a perspective. Now, sometimes when I get people like Mahlon stating that, sometimes it's harder to get closer in a emotional relationship. If they have someone that's got a lot of emotional needs, it might be more challenging for them to get closer to them because it's feelings, and we don't get into a whole lot of feelings. We're task oriented. We got this to do. It sucks. Let's move on. We got stuff to do. So I
Why
run
you
into stuff
chose
like
now
that.
to call me out, Dave? I don't know. I don't.
I was just say,
Well, I'm
Malin.
not. I don't know if this is the case, but sometimes in practice,
I think
that's
you
what I
do.
run into.
I think you do know. No, I mean you're hitting like the nail on the head. And again, do I think that I am a perfect specimen of psychological, you know, intelligence? No. I just have questions like these that are like, yeah, but if I'm trying to rationalize what trauma is, and I want what I need in the world, and this is not going to happen. I understand it. I need trauma to be a certain set of criteria, so then you can recognize it, you can understand it, and then you can deal with it and put it away. And that's not what this is. And you know, part of my big hang up with trauma is, and I'm just going to say it and maybe we can unpack it, is not everything everybody claims to be trauma is trauma. And not everything that is swept under the rug is not trauma. Like they both can be true, right? Like I understand that I can't classify everything as trauma, and I can't classify everything that people think are trauma as not trauma. So that I understand. But even with that understanding, I still hear this a lot. And as Jamie mentioned earlier, as you go through TikTok, it seems to be a very in your face trauma, 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 trauma. And it makes me go, but wait a minute. Not every single thing that you experience bad in your life is a traumatic event. And that was my first, like, okay, first statement. My second statement, and this is one after talking with Jamie and kind of sitting on it, is I can't be held responsible to respond to other people's trauma the way they want me to respond to it. And that's also the other part of this coin that really frustrates me. So I'm going to pause there because I don't want to lose these 2 points. But I think that's really at the heart of where I'm struggling with this topic.
Wow, where to dive into that deep end of the pool? Um, because from me, and my initial reaction is when one experiences trauma doesn't in and of itself exist alone. It's not a standalone. It's kind of like mucking through the mud, and you got your ladle full of mud, and the mud is your feelings, your emotions, your desire for acceptance. All these kinds of thought processes that you've experienced in your life are all in there. And so it's not crisp and clean. It's kind of like, oh my God, what's going to go on now? And people want acceptance. I mean, I think of, middle school, high school particularly, we're all striving to, get acceptance. And I think that, even if in a somewhat less social culture, we still want acceptance. There's still TikToks. Unfortunate thing in my world is that the trauma vernacular that's thrown around right now is what some of these young people are learning by. So then they learn in a framework to where everything is trauma. So where I'm kind of in alignment with you to some extent, because everybody brings their own experiences, and when we unpack it in a clinical environment, we're trying to figure out, is it trauma? Is it disappointment? Is it frustration? Is it, some people, I have had this, especially, I got anger issues, and I was like, tell me more. And so we're defining what anger issues are, and then where does that come from? Well, for most of us, we know that what emotion is like, if all you have, it's the go-to. Anger is the go-to. If all you have is a hammer, everything is a nail. So that's what we tend to go to manipulate our environment, to control our environment. Guys tend to do better at it, but I can tell you, girls are up there too. Things have changed in our culture.
People use it as a tool for sure.
Yeah. And it could be verbal, it could be physical, but I don't know if I'm getting to the heart of what you're saying. But to me, I sit there and say, if someone is having a problem that you're not reacting to their trauma experience in a certain way, I'm an advocate for saying, make the ask. How would you like me to respond? Well, you should know. And I was like, what does that look like? I'm a behavioralist, okay? Let's take things out of a feelings arena in that little soup bowl, and let's put it over here, because I want to know, like, you want me to stop watching TV and look at you with 100% focus. What do you want me to do right now?
Yeah. Do you think, and another thing that I guess I thought of when Mahlon was talking to is, do you feel like there's different spaces in time where something that may not typically have been, I'm using air quotes, traumatic, might feel traumatic? Like, I'm just thinking, if I'm under a massive amount of stress, or if there is lots going on in my life, like a recent divorce, loss of a parent, loss of a child, something that's been going on that may be something that I probably would be able to cope with pretty easily, might cause some extra difficulty in responding to that. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely,
it could be trauma because I'm low anyway. You know what I mean?
Yep. I think there's a lot to be said about that self-care. Sometimes when we're dealing with trauma situations, even stressful situations, oftentimes we're expending a lot of emotional energy, sometimes physical energy, to try to manipulate that or to help in some way, especially if it's someone we care about. And, I think as a parent, and losing another parent and having young children, and then all of a sudden, not only do you have to cope with the loss, but now you have to step in as a parent 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to be there for your kids, and you don't get a chance to mourn.
Yeah.
You don't get a chance to experience that. So you're constantly kind of bound up. Some people will have nightmares. They won't be able to sleep. Will have somatic complaints, headaches, stomach aches, constipation, weight gain. They'll feed the feelings. You've heard those kinds of things before, to where they're just, the brain is like, I need to do something. Because when it comes to feeding feelings, for example, this is very common in our culture, especially now when people are under a lot of financial stress and things of this nature with the economy, is empty carbs. You dump those into your system. It dumps the dopamine out of your brain, your little feel-good chemical, and you get that little bump, and it's like, Well, sometimes your brain likes swimming in that, that wants to jump in and like, I want some more of that. And then that's, especially in our culture of immediate gratification, then you start getting into substance abuse issues and alcoholism and things of this nature, because it just gets to be part of who we are. It doesn't take very long for a habit to establish, especially when you're dealing with sugar addictions, video game addictions, things like that. I mean, depending on the pleasure center activation in your brain and the desire for pleasure, you could, 15, 20 days of something and you're hooked.
So let me ask you this question. While you were talking, Dave, I was like, this is an interesting concept. So, and I don't know if this is what you were meaning. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm curious in your line of work. Are there some people then that are naturally susceptible to trauma and some people who aren't? Because if you talk about, people needing that dopamine hit or, it's swimming in there and some brains like it, some brains don't. I think some of your explanation talked about personality traits and behaviors. Some people exhibit them, some people don't. It makes me want to ask, well, then are there some people naturally resilient or resistant to trauma and there's some people who aren't?
Yes. Nice, quick answer is yes. There are some people who have been through, like, how some people want to put trauma on them because they hear what they've gone through, and it's like, how could you not be traumatized by all that? What is wrong with you that you're not freaking out right now because you've been through this traumatic event? And so then it's like vicarious trauma, which is something that we can talk to,
Oh
which is
gosh.
trauma in
We haven't
yeah,
even gone there yet.
I know. But it just gets like, oh my gosh, really? And that's kind of like, it's interesting because sometimes I think of when we interact in our environment, it's kind of like the bingo balls in the pit when you dump them all in there and they're just bouncing all over. And I think that's how we interact in our world sometimes. We're just bouncing all over and we don't know what's going on. There's just so much our brain is trying to accomplish. And so the anxiety is there. There, and any research will show you that a prolonged exposure to anxiety tends to feed into depression. Sometimes I've had it in clinical to where it's the two sides of the same coin. Our bodies were not meant to be keyed up that long for that much. And so usually we're looking for some way to cope with that. That's the drugs, alcohol, depression. We just shut down. Let's keep everybody away. It's safer. Somebody's going to cause me harm. Something will cause me harm.
So I have a question to that then. And I don't know why when you were talking about this popped in my head. I think it's related. But then kind of going off that if certain people can be resistant to trauma and some people are more susceptible to trauma, then can some people experience trauma and never know that they experience trauma?
Yes. I like how I get to throw this out. Yes, they can because that's their experience. But sometimes there's this wild thing that happens with people to where they will, sometimes we call it dissociation. So they will have kind of an out of body experience to where they were there present, but they have no recall, no mental recall. They sometimes you'll hear them say, "I blacked out. I have no idea what happened. I woke up and I was, someplace different." Well, that's your brain pulling into its like fight, flight, freeze primal part of your brain is like going, danger, danger. And so it's at that point it's fleeing, and it's fleeing reality to some extent. And that's where things go, and we don't have that. Now, I have some people that have full recall and just handle it as like, it happened. Yeah.
Well, and I think that goes back to what I'm hearing is that goes back to kind of what you said in the beginning, is that it's an emotional response to an extremely stressful situation.
Yeah.
Where, I wonder if it's funny that I literally, if I could tell you how many conversations Mahlon and I have had about this specific topic, we would probably be giggling right now. But it's like, I think it's that focus. It's the focus on the event that gets us off track. If we can stick with the emotional response, I think that's why it varies so much from person to person. As I'm just thinking back in my own life and the work that I've done and my kids and all of those things, my two kids can experience the exact same event. One of them can have a very emotional response to it, and the other one can be like, that was Tuesday. You know what I mean?
Right.
So then one in that scenario, Jamie, one would have experienced trauma and one wouldn't have.
I
Good.
I don't.
It could very well happen. Sometimes I'm not an artist, but sometimes I will draw out, and I'll have two people standing, 5 feet apart from each other approximately, and I'll have one of them draw a number 6 on the floor between them, and I'll ask, "What do you see?" And I'll ask the one who drew it sees a number 6. The person across from them, what do they see at number 9?
Mm-hmm.
Are they wrong?
Well, it
It's
depends
their
on your perspective.
perspective. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So basically, Dave is sitting here saying yes, and then leaving it at
no.
that when Dr. Krista says it depends. But it's the same answer, Mahlon. They're both
Well-
saying it depends.
But and I think that's the right answer. I think that's the safe answer. But then another question that I have, because I've been told this, right? And I think in our conversations, Jamie, it's been said to me, is that even people that don't realize they have trauma have experienced trauma. And that's where I have difficulty, because I'm like, wait a minute. That would be like saying, oh, I'm trying to think of an analogy. But it to me, it doesn't make sense, because I would have to have realization that this was a traumatic event, or this was something, because again, it's my response to it. So if I have recognized an event to be traumatic, my response to it's not going to really matter, because it's a non-event. But then when you have people external to you saying, well, that's traumatic, you should be, that's a big deal. Now suddenly it's being almost told to me that this is trauma that you should be experiencing. Why aren't you experiencing it? That's weird. That's not exactly our conversation, but I'm just putting the gist together. And so for me to understand how trauma would work, the first and foremost has to be a realization by the person that this was indeed traumatic. Then we can get into clarification around if we want to quantify what is trauma. And again, that's person by person. But I have a real big block here when it says, if I don't recognize something as trauma, how can I experience trauma when I don't know it? I don't know how that works. I don't understand how that can be.
Good point. I'm sitting there thinking how I could respond to that. Some people don't necessarily have an awareness of a trauma event. I've had young children that cannot wear like a scarf, have a extreme aversion being touched around the neck. No idea why. Get a parent in session, find out that when they were born, they were a blue baby with umbilical cord wrapped around their neck in utero, and as they were being born.
Wow. Well, and that
Did they know that?
right.
No.
Right.
Would they have known that from a caregiver? Possibly, yeah. They did that day. But the ultimate thing is, well, it makes sense then. They're going to have an aversion to anything around the neck, because the brain recorded it and says, let's not have anything there.
And I'm just going to say this. I'm just going to say it. I'm not saying that that's not fact or that's not possible. But again, even in that example, it was an external person quantifying that experience for him. I mean, it very much could have been that, and I'm not saying it wasn't. But again, there's no realization from the person experiencing it. So now you have an outside entity, a pretty reliable one, but you still have an outside entity saying, let me tell you what that trauma means. So again, now the person probably does believe it's because of this, because I have a reliable source who I trust with all of my heart, body, mind, and soul that's going to tell me the truth all the time. So now suddenly that is my trauma experience, right? Because where else am I going to go with, even just in that example?
It could happen that way, because especially if they are in a state to where they believe that the source that they're hearing that from, or they've heard it from multiple sources, and or they are recognizing that need for acceptance at such a high level to where we call them people pleasers. They'll just go along, get along, and so then they'll just adopt that as part of their verbiage. I mean, I could sit here and we could have an entire podcast on suicide, because I get so many people. It's like, I hate my life. I wish I were dead. That's part of the vernacular of young people these days. Where does it come from? We could do social media on that, but it just, to some of us who have experienced losses from that, we're like going, hold up, let's not say that.
Hmm.
If you're mad, say you're mad.
Yeah, I was also thinking about it's hard to come up with examples without, especially in this space where I don't want to, any of my close people that listen might know, you know what I'm talking about. But it's something you said about that dissociation piece. Is that another, I mean, that might be another space where someone could experience trauma and they don't realize that it, you know what I'm saying? Because they dissociated away from it.
Yep, yep.
Because
And especially if they want to fill in the gaps, and
mhm,
they're like, what did I do? Sometimes it's like, what happened?
mhm,
They'll want to know, so they will be more accepting of the story from somebody else from their perspective,
mhm.
especially if it's a trusting person.
As a foster parent for many years, I can think of a couple kids that I worked with that I think dissociation is exactly how they got through that stuff. And
Absolutely.
so then in therapy, it was even hard to talk about things because they didn't have recollection of what had happened. So then those outside side sources know what happened because of parent report or what's been
Yeah,
reported to the department.
investigations, all sorts of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the little kid doesn't have any clue what's happening because they just kind of checked out and went to that space that was safe while that stuff was happening. And, um, I think that's that's probably a whole other mental health topic in and of itself. But
Right.
um, I,
Well,
I also think that language piece is huge too, because for me, I think that's where it was beneficial for me when I understood and could look at that event in a different way and then see how it's affecting the way I interact with the world, right? Like either a relationship um or or a response to stress or whatever. I think that's what was helpful for me was to be able to see those things
That's
in a
cool.
way that it could be traumatic and then
That's part of your
understand.
executive function part of your brain. You're actually thinking on that level when you're a young person or when you're in a highly stressful situation. You don't have an awareness typically of that. You are so in the moment. You're in survival mode.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll say, and you don't have that ability to kind of ground yourself in like perspective. Is this right? Is this wrong?
Yeah,
You
no,
know,
it's all reaction in the moment. If
abs-
you can catch me outside of that moment, make me aware of it and help me, you know what I mean? When I
there
can
you go.
process through it, then I can see it in a different way. And that's what was so transformative about learning about trauma for me was to be able to see, and I'm not gonna sit here and say that, major, major trauma events happen in my life over and over and over again. But there's definitely things that were um either difficult for um gave me messages about myself or things that made me hyper vigilant or afraid
Yep,
of
yep.
different situations that I didn't recognize until I started doing some of this learning. And thankfully it was in a time that I could hear it and then respond to it. But I feel like if that happened for me, it happens for other people too, that yes, I'm not going to sit here and tell you you've been traumatized, but those things can really affect the way we interact and live through life. So
Absolutely.
so I'm hearing this, and it makes me want to ask another question, which is,
buckle up.
well, should I tell you what my real reaction is, or do you want me just to formulate into a question?
You can.
React. Keep it real.
My reaction would be, and again, I'm walking a razor thin because I think you guys are using real life examples, and I do not want to diminish any of those, right? So I'm trying to generalize it in my brain. But if we're talking about an adult, a kid, an adolescent, whatever, go across the spectrum, my reaction to that is, how dare us, and I'll say us as a society, make someone relive their trauma? Now, I'm sure there's a variety of reasons why we would have to do that. But to me, and again, I'm not a psychologist, I have no backing in this area at all. So I'm probably, no, I am talking about things that are outside of my depth. But my real reaction would be, if disassociation at a time is what has got that person to cope through what the event was, forcing them to relive through it and make them remember or make them address that trauma head on before they're ready, isn't that just re-traumatizing people over and over and over again? Because isn't the disassociation there to protect you? Because I have to believe your brain does certain functions to keep you. And the reason I'm trying to rationalize this is when my mother passed away, she was the first significant death in my life. And I remember that the mortuary that we used, the caretaker was, you're not going to remember a lot of this week. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, you'll have what's called grief brain. And your brain is going to omit a lot of what happens because it's its way of protecting you from everything that's going on. And so when I hear disassociation, and again, I'm sure it's at a different level, different degree, but that's my reaction is, well, how dare we try to force people to go through this trauma when if disassociation is how they are coping with it, I can see that being more damaging than helpful.
Great story and great framework to operate in on that. Um, those kinds of situations, what oftentimes happens is that it causes like a bottleneck of emotion and memory and experience that impacts their normal day because they haven't been able to tell their story. Yes, you definitely run the risk of re traumatizing someone, but sometimes somebody has gone through it, and much like what you described with grief brain, that they didn't experience it. They didn't kind of get a chance to process it and be okay with how they handled the situation. They just kind of like shove it up on a shelf. It's done. It's over. It's in the past. What are we talking about that for? We can't change it. It's already done. And it's like, but hold up. You haven't been sleeping right. You have an ulcer the size of Texas. It's kind of like we got some other things going on. Your body's sending you some signs right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm an EMDR therapist. We do some eye movement desensitization stuff because we're trying to get into some of those memories and basically very watered down. Everybody's gonna probably not like this definition, the Dave definition. Disclaimer. Um, is that we're trying to make peace with it. We're trying to change the narrative of the experience so it's not so traumatic for them, that it normalizes their experience. They get more self acceptance, they get more confidence, and basically able to compartmentalize it in a healthier way. So it's not like this wedge that they keep between them and their world from being hurt again. Because sometimes I get people that just it's like a shield. They don't want to let it down because if they let it down, if they tell their story, the world's going to hurt them. They're going to judge them. They're going to exclude them. They're going to treat them poorly. They're going to bully them, whatever it might be. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, and I think to give you, I guess, an example, Mahlon, of something you are familiar with, that was my mom was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, and a big portion of her coping whenever something bad happened was dissociating. Eventually, it turned into, as an adult, dissociating into the other personalities. Right, she would go away, and one of these other personalities would come out, and that's very much a trauma-based diagnosis, from what I understand. Is that, I mean, I'm no expert in it. I just know what I lived. But my understanding is that all started from very young. When she was experiencing the trauma, that's when all of this started happening. This wiring in her brain started taking over, and it was a protective factor for her, for sure. And then much, much, much later, because we didn't know anything about it. Like literally this happened before I was born. And then my junior year in high school, she started having some mental health challenges. And it started with what is that? Failure to, or no, adjustment disorder. to anxiety or depression to, all of a sudden we have a dissociative identity disorder diagnosis. Actually, it was multiple personalities back then. That's how long ago this was.
Yep.
But I
Very
mean, that
familiar.
it took 2 or 3 years to get there. But it was because, and that her therapist told us, it was because she was in a space where she felt safe enough to start exploring those traumatic events, that's why it was resurfacing at that point. There was probably nothing that triggered it. It's not like it was dormant and then it just came out. It was because she was in a space where she felt safe enough to explore it at that point. So that's an example, Mahlon, I guess, that you lived through with me to say, hey, this was, that
Yeah.
was an example of someone who didn't know what the trauma had done to her until very, very later.
It's
Yeah.
cool that they were able to find, a safe place to where they could share that.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's a double bind sometimes, because sometimes they start telling their story and they come up with stuff that they didn't even realize, and it sends them further into more issues, just because they're getting in touch with that. And sometimes we run that risk even with EMDR, as we're pulling out keystone memories, these most significant issues, and they're all of a sudden they're able to kind of lay it out on the workbench and work with it a little bit, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is what happened,
Mm-hmm.
and you hope, as a clinician, you hope for the aha moment. It's like, that's why
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't doing anything wrong. And that wasn't even. Oh, and they
Mm-hmm.
will literally. I've had folks, and that's when I enjoy what I do, obviously. But that's when it's the aha moment for a clinician. It's like, got it.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. Just jumping in here real quick. Jamie and I had such a great time talking with Dave that we ended up with a lot more content than we expected. So we decided to break this up into 2 parts. Part 2 will be released on September 25th. And if you've been enjoying this conversation, which we hope you have, we will see you then when it drops. Have a great day, and we will see you soon. Thanks, everyone.